As everyone gets seated, I would love to welcome our panel today. We have an excellent panel here that will be talking about harbor deepening to 55 feet, why it's needed and what to know. Today, at the end of the presentation, you will see that there will be a couple of QR codes that will have CEU credits available. Please wait for those for ASLA and AIA. You'll be able to scan your QR code in order to get your CEU credits. Also, this is a PDH track session, so if you are interested in getting a PDH, please either, we'll ask a few questions at the end of the panel, and you'll be able to track it downstairs. All right, well, thank you everyone for being here, and I will pass it off to Pippa to moderate the panel.
There's a lot. Doesn't work. I can talk loud. Or can I? Oh, now I'm on. Should we each introduce ourselves as we go? I know we're starting a little late, and there's a lot to talk about, but this panel is, I think, particularly important because it does one of the things that is so special to the Waterfront Alliance, which is bring different interests and disciplines related to the water together. And I think, as you'll hear today from our panelists, the next harbor deepening project is so critical to the economic future of the port and the maritime industry here, but it is also an amazing opportunity for dredge material generation and reuse that is going to be critical to many of the ongoing restoration and adaptation projects around our harbor. And so without further ado, I will pass it off to Kevin Doell, and we'll each introduce ourselves as we.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Doell. I'm the non-technical part of this presentation. So for your engineering credits, I'm going to try to see non-technical. I'm already advancing the slides, and I don't see the slides. Put the slides up on the screen. Where are they?
Yeah, we're streaming the other sessions, so if we can get the slides up.
These are all the sponsors. Hope you saw all the sponsors. We have to get through 20 slides of sponsors first. All right, make sure you got them all.
It was supposed to be going as we
credit.
settled in, so.
There we go. There's a lot of good sponsors here. Wow. Commodore. Almost. This was not in the rehearsal. Come on. Holy cow.
I think it's just in a loop.
Ah, here we are.
Yeah,
okay, here are your presenters. I think you saw that overall. Okay. All right, so this is actually my slide. Change the color. So, all right, so my name's Kevin Doell. I'm with APM Terminals. APM as an APM Mahler Maersk. So APM Terminals is part of the Maersk family overall. So I represent one of the operators out here who actually move boxes across the ocean and through our terminals overall. And what I'm here to set the table, so to speak, set the table for the crew here, in terms of what it really is. It's more than just a few feet of water, but that a deeper harbor deepening, it offers operational flexibility and efficiency and a competitive edge for the port overall. That's really what we're talking about overall. This is a quick orientation map here. These are the welcoming wagon to the global trade coming into New York and New Jersey. You can see there's 6 terminals in all, and APM Terminals is there on the other side of the bridge. Here's a little flyover of APM Terminals Elizabeth. You can see here it's a 350-acre terminal. We got 15 ship-to-shore cranes. We handle about 25% of the cargo coming into the Port of New York and New Jersey. And we just signed a new 33-year lease extension, so we're going to be working here until 2062. And as we are working here, we will be spending millions of dollars to rebuild the terminal while we operate the terminal. We're going to improve its capability, we're going to electrify the terminal, and we're going to future-proof the berth. So it's a great little flyover here facing north, and you can see MAR terminals right next to us, north of us overall. All right, so that was the terminals part of the business, but here's the shipping part of the business, Maersk. So Maersk has 700 ships. They visit 500 ports around the world. And as everyone has seen this slide before, and probably every time you had this conversation, ships keep getting bigger. And bigger is better, because bigger is much more efficient, both from a cost perspective and even sustainability perspective overall. But of course, the draft restrictions limit the large vessel movement to high tide. That's the catch. You can't just move anytime you want. You have to move with the tide, and that's the restrictions overall. So what I'm showing here is 1956, Sealand put this box out here. They started to standardize the container, but it was actually in the 60s when it became standard across the board, and that literally has changed the world overall. What I've outlined in blue there, you can see here, while our terminal can handle 18,000 TEU vessels, our sweet spot is the 13,000 TEU vessels. So you have an amazing investment, but you really can't use that investment to its full potential when you have tide restrictions and draft restrictions overall. But the main part here to talk about is the ripple effects. The ripple effects. So while we have a 50-foot channel here and it's transformative, it does cost us a lot. It costs the shippers, the ocean liners who are trying to have larger vessels that are more efficient to run overall. The truckers want to see cargo flowing super fast in and out. The terminal workers want a port that is very competitive, constantly getting a flow of businesses, kind of leading the pack so they can have secure jobs. And the shippers themselves, the people who are pushing out the cargo, they want a constant, consistent flow. They don't want any headaches, and they want a fast speed to market. But the ripple effects of when you are restricted, the tides, that has many, many different effects here. For example, the arrival delays, you can have empty berths and labor, schedule disruption, and cargo limits. So let me give you an example. Ships have to come and go by the tides. High tide, they're going to come in. But I can't schedule labor every single time there's a high tide. They want a steady course. Imagine if you said to your spouse, honey, when are you working this week? Well, let me check the lunar calendar, honey. No, it doesn't work like that. So for example, if we have a window for a 7 o'clock arrival and you miss the arrival in your vessel, the gang doesn't start working until 11 o'clock at night. You could have a gigantic container ship sitting out there for 3 hours not being worked. That's a very expensive asset to sit there. You could actually move 300 boxes in those same 3 hours. So that's a lot of lost time. Let alone if you did have a vessel that couldn't get in, it would be idling off port. If it's idling, it's spewing bunker and it's spewing emissions. So you don't want to stop the flow. You want the flow to go. And you want those terminal berths constantly in motion. But the biggest ripple effect here is whether you want a competitive risk of shifting volumes to ports with deeper all-tide access. We want to be first. We're America. We love to be first. We love to be the winners. We love to be on top, right? So here, you can tell we have a very special spot here on the East Coast. We're like a first port of call. We're where people want to go, but we want to maintain that. And literally, there's a competitive advantage to being a first port of call, because the first port of call gets the most volume gets the most investment, and the most prosperity for your region. So there's a huge advantage to being first and not being Captain Mike, one of the folks we talked to here, he said to me, ports are a point of risk, but they could be an enabler. If your port is not restricted to tidal access, you can be an enabler for vessels coming in. So at the end of the day, what it means for the vessels is that if you have no restrictions, you can bring your largest vessels, your most modern, your most safest, your cleanest vessels into port. You can have shorter port stays and move those vessels right out. And the terminals can be used in the most efficient and never sit there idle. So there's a lot of advantages. So at the end of the day, as far as I'm setting the table, so to speak, a 24-hour port shouldn't be beholden to a 12-hour tidal window overall. And that when vessels can arrive at any time, we can operate all the time. So that's a little bit of why, from a commercial perspective, it's so valuable for terminals and containers to be able to move in and out of ports without a tidal restriction. Now, how do you get that done? That's for the rest of the folks to talk about here. Thank you.
I'm actually going to stand because I may want to point to a couple of my slides.
Joe, introduce yourself. Not everyone knows you.
I will. All right, we got it. So I'm Joe Seebode, and some of you may have heard this little joke before from me. My last name is Seebode. It's from Zeeboden. It's from bottom of the sea, and it's European roots. I'm dredge material. So I've had a passion for working on this my entire career. And again, I work for the Army Corps of Engineers. I've been there a long time. I'm the Deputy District Commander and the Chief of Programs. and I was heavily invested and involved in previous deepenings. So the next phase is very exciting to us at the Corps of Engineers. I'm going to start by talking to you, and it's almost unimaginable to me time-wise, but 25 years ago, I wrote a paper with my colleague at the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, Tom Wakeman, who some of you I'm sure will remember, and it was called Synergy Among Navigation, Environment, and Port Objectives, Finding a Sustainable Approach. And it was written by Tom and I, and the last page of the paper, and I have the paper right here, this 12-page paper, was this little graphic we put together that showed how we could create synergy, where we could introduce not only environmental features, but resiliency features and other opportunities as we moved through the development of the 50-foot deepening. And we actually, at the end of that project, we're proud to tell everyone that we used 100% of the dredge material beneficially for a wide array of uses. And as we get into the 55-foot deepening, that is our goal, 100% usage of about 35 million cubic yards of about 10 or 11 different types of materials that we're going to dredge: sand, clay, glacial till, contaminated mud, clean mud, 5 different kinds of rock. We got shish, we got shale, we got diabase, we got pegmatite, and we got one more. So a lot of different types of material. How you set those all up to be dredged and used beneficially is a key component of our overall strategy. So a little bit about the port. Why are we going to be deepening this port? Because we deepened it just 15 to 20 years ago to 50 feet. So here we are, the next phase. Well, I'm going to show you a slide that shows multiple phases that we've taken this through the years, a lot of it based on the technology of shipping and the size of the ships that are calling at the port. But, you know, the key things on this slide are the port handled 8.7 million loaded 20-foot equivalent units in 2023. It's worth $238 billion. 16% of all U.S. ports in the country, 16% of all cargo coming through U.S. ports in the country came through New York and New Jersey. And the technology in ships, as I mentioned, is changing. And as we did our study and completed it, we actually found the cost to the taxpayer, the ultimate benefit cost of deepening this harbor to 55 feet is 7 to 1. So $7 made for every dollar invested by deepening this port. Positive impacts on the consumer, positive impacts environmentally as we use these new ships, and a lot of other benefits to the region, including jobs and the overall market share. So a little bit about the history of the deepening and deepening of New York and New Jersey Harbor. So when Henry Hudson arrived, and we talked about it, or actually wrote about it in our paper, he found a deep harbor. It was in his log, 17 feet, naturally deep. That was what they were plying back in 1607. But then as time went by, the ships got larger, and by the time we got to 1986, the harbor was down to 35 feet. And container ships, small though they may be at that time, were starting to come into the harbor. And so in 1986, in the Water Resource Development Act, there was an authority, after a study by the Corps in concert with the Port Authority, that established we needed to go from 35 down to 40. And believe it or not, over the next 40 years, or excuse me, the next 30 years, we went from 35 to 40 to 45, ultimately then to 50. And we never finished the project before we got the authority to deepen to the next depth. So we ultimately did some consolidation, and the 50-foot project was completed in about 2015, 2016. Here we are in 2025. We have the authorized project in the Water Resources Development Act of 2022. Congress has given us money, and we are now in design for the first contract on the 55-foot project. So we are going strong right now in what's called planning, engineering, and design efforts. This is where we'll be doing our geotechnical work and other work to be able to develop the design. So a little bit about the schedule. So last May, out at Port Jersey, we signed the design agreement with the chairman of the Port Authority and the executive director and the assistant secretary of the Army, and started data collection and modeling. So we do a lot of modeling for ships. We do ship simulations to make sure that we're getting the configuration of the channel right. For those of you who know this harbor, and I know most of you do, there's a lot of twists and turns and a lot of sharp turns in this harbor that we need to look at. And right now, we're also starting our geotechnical work. So lots of borings to understand the types of materials, where they are, how much exactly is there, and we'll develop our contracts based on that information so that we can beneficially use 100% of the material. We're in plans and specs development over the course of the next 2 years, and our intent is to award the first construction contract in 2027, pending funding, of course, and we'll move out on a project that probably will take another 10 to 12 years if we are funded the same way we were funded for the 50-foot project. So it's an exciting time. I said April 28 here. We're looking at 27, as I mentioned, to try to condense that schedule. So a little bit about the way we're proposing to build the project. We expect we'll have multiple contracts going at the same time. There'll be large contracts. We will never shut down the port. That's not our intention. We'll stop traffic one way or two-way if we're doing blasting or moving equipment. But our intent is to start in Newark Bay, Contract 1, which will be a contract that immediately provides value to the navigation community and the facilities, because it will allow ships to back out of Elizabeth Channel, and it will provide a wider and deeper area for K-turns and the like. And then we're going to proceed sequentially and in a disciplined way through these contracts. And again, they are set up to provide benefits to the port community and also to enable us to have reasonable size contracts based on cost and equipment availability. So that's our plan for the inner harbor. On the outer harbor, we're looking at doing contracts, 4 contracts as well. We will do these at the end in Ambrose. This is where a lot of the sand material will come from. And we won't do this early because we know we'll get some sedimentation over time. So we'll do this at the end so that we can turn over the complete project. So I talked a little bit about using all this material beneficially, and I'll go through these slides quickly. I don't want to take too much more time. But right now, on the street, if you go on our website, you'll see that there's a updated dredge material management plan that is out for public review and comment. And we are looking for sites to beneficially use this material. We're working with private firms. We're working with commercial enterprises. We're working with government agencies who may have environmental restoration projects or need for fill materials. And we are going to set out a plan to use all of the material. The Army Corps right now has a beneficial use of dredge material goal nationally of 70%. It is our intent to use 100% of this. So if you have a site or you have interest in dredge material management, don't hesitate to talk to me today, or we'll put you in touch with some folks and you can get more information. And these are just some of the types of things that we're looking to do with the materials. We've got some very significant environmental restoration work going on in the harbor. We're going to look for materials for those. We're looking at wetland restoration projects, island reconstruction in Jamaica Bay. We're going to look at fishing reefs offshore. And we're even doing a large-scale project with the state of New Jersey to enhance Liberty State Park, and we're looking for opportunities to use material as part of that project. So a lot of opportunities. I went through those slides really quickly, but you can go on our website, look at the Hudson Raritan Estuary Environmental Restoration Program. That will tell you a little bit about some of the projects we're looking at. And again, I encourage you to participate in the process with dredge material management, because 35 million cubic yards is no drop in the bucket. It's a significant amount of material, and there's a lot of opportunity to do a lot of good things. And as I started, okay, create a synergy that is going to enable us to see sustainable development in our region. And that slide that Tom Wakeman and I put together 25 years ago, this is what it's evolved to today. The waters we share with lots of different opportunities to use materials, do dredging, and to improve the overall quality of the estuary. So thank you. I think I'm going to turn it over to Pippa,
Yeah.
and we'll go forward from there.
So if you didn't get enough on beneficial reuse and dredge, I'm just going to keep talking about it. So I'm a landscape architect, and a big part of, I'll leave this up so you can get all the deets and know what to Google, but as Joe said, this is the interim dredge materials management plan, and it really marks, it's a confluence of a couple conditions in the harbor of like running out of space to put some of the material in the way that we've traditionally disposed of it, but also a real commitment from the Corps to reuse and a really rethinking of how we view dredge and reframing it from something that is to be disposed of as to something that we can really reuse. The public comment period has been extended to May 22nd, so to reiterate what Joe said, go online, read the plan, make your comments. But we're really, the harbor deepening is really an unprecedented, and this is just a quote from the Dredge Materials Management Plan update. It's really an unprecedented opportunity to explore, advocate, and take action on reusing dredge material for much needed projects that we're trying to do anyways. This is habitat restoration, but also investment in adaptation of our ecosystems and creation and recreation of ecosystems, as well as site adaptation as we start thinking about climate change and resilience. There are many activities. These are all activities that the Corps has identified. But it's not like they haven't done this before. Oh no, my slides did not get updated. Oh dear, they were supposed to be updated. So that was the Corps has done this before. That was a map of all of the dredge movement from 2009 to 2012, looking at, we have beneficially reused the dredge from the last harbor deepening as well as periodic dredging. A lot of that has gone to CAP, the offshore disposal site at HARS. A lot of it has gone to do great environmental things, capping mines in Pennsylvania. But I think with the next harbor deepening, there's a greater commitment to using the material, but also to using it locally for restoration and adaptation needs that we need right here in New York and New Jersey. And that's what I kind of want to talk about today. And this is really, this is a shot and a quote from this book, which I'll make a pitch for, Silt, Slant, Slurry, which was, if you're really interested in this topic, which was written by my colleague Gina Worth, as well as other members of the Dredge Research Collaborative, and explores the history and pattern of dredging and reuse of material in sort of the 4 port areas. But one of the things that they advocate for that I hear in the Dredge Materials Management Plan too is really we need to rethink about this as a resource, as the sediment, the substrate for what we want to do. And so it's not like we haven't done, sorry, I skipped that. It's not like we haven't done this before. As Joe alluded to, the Marsh Island restoration in Jamaica Bay, if you haven't been out there, if you haven't seen it, huge investment and work by the Corps to restore the historic Marsh Islands of Jamaica Bay. Not only is that reused sediment, it's engaged like individuals and people and community in replanting and really restoring a treasured habitat there. And there's still more to do. Also, not to leave New Jersey out, thank you to Terry Doss from the Meadowlands Research and Restoration Institute who shared this. This is the in Kearney, New Jersey, the Marsh Resources Mitigation Bank. Sorry, it's in Carlstad. And this was created from dredge material in 1998, right? And now it's a thriving salt marsh with salt marsh sparrows. We've done this before, and we can continue to evolve. But can we do more? Also, the sand is the thing that we all focus on. That's what gets used for beach nourishment. That's what gets used for marsh. But there's going to be an incredible amount of rock material. These are breakwater reefs that were created at the Sims recycling plant, WEDG certified project too, I'll note. And there's going to be plenty more rock material coming out of the harbor deepening, and that's why the Hudson Raritan Estuary program, the Hudson River Foundation, is actually in the process of doing a rock reef pilot program to really understand what sort of habitats we need to create, what are some of the barriers to reusing that rock in our shallow nearshore habitats, so we're ready for the rock when it comes. There's other work that's happening in our harbor. So, historically, we've been trying to talk about restoring historic marshes, but one of the urgent needs in New York and New Jersey Harbor right now is keeping the marshes we have. With sea level rise, the marshes that exist without proactive action by us are going to disappear, right? They're going to be drowned by sea level rise. The natural processes in our urban environments are not enabling them to keep up with sea level rise. So there's new techniques, new materials, thin layer placement being one of them. There's a great research publication on this that was published by the Corps looking at this practice nationally. But right here in New York City, this is a little 1-acre site that the New York City Parks Restoration Natural Resources Group piloted last year it's in Idlewild, but it's actually Hook Creek, and it's been very successful. They didn't use dredge material for this. They had to truck in sand because of the small scale of this, and it's really hard to coordinate the logistics of dredging projects with these sites. But how do we do more of this and scale it up? And they have a restoration plan for all the New York City-owned marshes, and there are categories that for need for sediment placement and for waterward expansion. There are plenty of marsh restoration adaptation projects in New York that need this. There's also plenty in New Jersey. This is a planned project at Sawmill Creek, the Kearney, New Jersey Sawmill Creek, not the one in Staten Island, but there's work to be done there too, where they're combining new recreational trails with marsh island restoration. Again, is going to need a huge amount of sediment. So Joe talked about some of the restoration projects that are within the Corps' jurisdiction, but there's all of these other agencies and entities. We need to be advocating for how they can get access and thinking about the pathways for that to happen. This is also not a dredge project, but this is to say, I'm a landscape architect. I see other landscape architects and architects in the room. There's a huge number of, every single project pretty much now that we work on is dealing with making resilient open space, resilient recreation. We're talking about site elevation to mitigate that grade change to elevated buildings and building emphasis. Pretty much, I have very few projects that are, net cut now, right? Everybody's lifting sites up. So how do we make this happen on land? But, I think to do that, to take another quote from this book, we really need to rethink how we view dredge from a material to be disposed of as an asset that we need to manage. But we also need to set the systems in place to make that happen, right? There are many, many regulatory barriers to using this material in places that we live in, so that's a big hurdle that we have to get over. We need facilities to process dredge material, dewater, sort, and otherwise process. These are big things that we need to think about, investments we need to make. We're going to need waterfront space to store materials. And honestly, we're going to need logistical and management systems and potentially changes to our procurement process to enable that coordination of projects that are producing the material to those that are using the material and navigating that scale and coordinating that across agencies and jurisdictions. So by Joe's timeline, we have about 3 years to figure that all out. So let's get to work.
Let's see here. Nope, this is still yours. Wow, these are all mixed up.
we'll run with it. Okay. So I can't see the slides sitting over there, so I'm going to stand over here. I hope you don't mind. So I'm Todd Manson. I'm with Geosyntec Consultants. I'm a coastal engineer. So when I was asked to be on this panel, I was thinking, okay, what can I really contribute to all of this? And I think it brings a unique perspective as a coastal engineer, someone who's worked in New York Harbor and New York City for the last 15, 20 years, what the impact of this actually is going to be a little bit more on our shorelines. So we talk about the economic need, we talk about the need of this, we talk about what we're going to be doing with the materials. Are there any other things that are going on with this project that might be of concern for others? And I will say the Army Corps has done a considerable amount of work studying what these ancillary effects could possibly be. I'm cherry picking from their chief's report a couple of issues that I saw that would be worthwhile discussing here today. I'm focusing specifically on the inner harbor and the channel widening there. So the picture on your left is in Newark Bay, one of the two areas where they're actually going to be widening the channel. And you can see the outline here is where the toe of the new channel is going to be. So that's going to be the bottom flat surface of where the new deepening is. And then also here on the right is the Kilvan Coal. And there's a couple of different areas around here that are scheduled to be a little wide. So specifically for the Kilvan Coal, I want to look at, what are the different kinds of shoreline types that we have along this area? And it's incredibly diverse. You have hard bulkhead structures, you have working waterfronts, you have parks, you have derelict structures that are still out there. You have mixed use where it goes from a parkland into a deteriorated structure, into a hard structure, into a natural shoreline. You have all sorts of things going on in this area. So what does this deepening actually mean for this? Is there any impacts to this for any of these types of sites? So we look at, and this is where a little bit more of the technical stuff comes in. So if you're non-technical, sorry, we'll get through this. If you are technical, sorry, we'll get through this. If you look at what this means as far as the dredge profile is concerned, the Corps in their report, in an appendix at the very end, says that structures within 186 feet of the toe of the new dredge footprint may be susceptible to some kind of impacts as opposed to the widening. There's an asterisk there because there's a lot behind that. For example, in the Kilvan Coal itself, a lot of that's probably going to be rock material that's going to be blasted. You're not going to have the 3-to-1 slope there. You're not going to have the impacts right to shoreline. But they did identify a few key structures that are scheduled either for monitoring or for reinforcement as a result of the work, or at least for further study before the work begins. So if we look at what the impacts could be, this is all theoretical. For a bulkheaded area here, we have our existing profile. Perhaps the side slope goes down a little bit. We need to make sure that us as engineers realize that this project is coming and what this means for our waterfront assets. Does this mean that existing structures are okay? Does it mean that we might need to do another inspection before the deepening happens to make sure that those structures can take the effects of this? And what are potentially some effects now of scour of these vessels going by? Do we need some kind of a tow protection? Similarly, for any kind of natural shorelines, stone revetments, any other kind of nearshore berms and sills and things, you can see that a new profile of this may end up leading to some tow erosion, to some instability. So we have to make sure that our existing infrastructure that's out there is adequately constructed so that it can adapt to this. Another thing I picked out, moving a little bit away, is kind of vessel wake waves. And you can kind of see what we're talking about, the increase of ship size is going to mean for the port to be able to handle. And a lot of this, from the sedimentation study, a lot of the modeling that the Corps has done has excluded ship traffic impacts to this. So it's one of those things where larger ships, you immediately start to think, oh, okay, bigger bow wake waves, more shoreline erosion, what's going to happen here? The Army Corps has developed a vessel wake prediction tool. It's a very high-level tool. It just looks at very empirical formulas and takes into consideration ship speed, beam, length, draft, along with the channel itself. And running some of these numbers, the analysis, there's really not too much that I can see, at least from this graphic, which you can see what your anticipated wave height would be along the shore, that really seems out of the ordinary for what would typically happen in the harbor itself. However, it's one of those other things that just as engineers, we know these vessels are coming. We need to make sure that we're prepared and we can design for these. And that's as quickly as I wanted to go through that.
And it's just this. All right. Mine was a little easier. I'm Hilary McCarron. I work for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, and in that capacity, I oversee port policy and planning. And just humor me for a second, because I learned my friend Joe is into corny jokes. So, Joe, what did the ocean say to? What did the ocean say to the cargo ship? Nothing. It just waved. All right. Ba-boom. Listen, I've been asked to talk about two things today. First is a little bit about the port strategic plan and its alignment to regional economic goals. And then the second is about the role of policy and legislation in supporting harbor deepening and addressing maritime industry needs. Look, I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to cover that in 5 minutes, but I'm going to give it a go. Just to give you a little bit of sense, in 2019, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey released a port master plan. And this 30-year plan, essentially a flexible roadmap that chart the course for growth and development for the Port of New York and New Jersey. Many of the recommendations in that plan took a holistic approach, mapping out the next generation of land use, water use, and infrastructure development. It abides by 5 guiding principles. So the first one is ensuring sustainability and resiliency. Second is promoting regional economic generation. The third is establishing state-of-the-art facilities. The fourth is providing a platform so that we can partner with all local stakeholders. And then the fifth is shaping the growth of the region. So the plan proposes a series of short and long-term actions, some of which were actually incorporated in recent business plans, but there's more to do. The port's channel deepening is a big part of the PMP. So recognizing the port's pivotal role, my team conducted a series of workshops for which we looked at what we need to do for the next 5 years. I think I'm just going to go to the next slide. Yeah, so this is just a little teaser on that plan. It's going to be released later this year, and it aims to build a strong competitive stance for an ever-evolving global trade environment. I mean, look what's going on in the news with tariffs, and it's certainly from the post-pandemic, it's been a wave for us. What's exciting about this new plan is that it embodies many necessary steps, particularly regarding land and water optimization, addressing aging infrastructure, and integrating solutions that improve fluidity for cargo movement in a sustainable and environmentally friendly manner. Plus, the plan works with the Port Authority's priorities, such as the capital plan. Not only are we going to be deepening our channels to 55 feet, we're also going to be working with our terminal operators like APM, MAR, and Port Liberty to be able to replace all of our berths. There's about 90 berths at our port that need to coincide with the deepening of the 55-foot project. And I'm really pleased to say that we're actually starting that work. We've received a U.S. DOT Port Infrastructure Development Grant to help us kick off that effort. So I'm bringing everything full circle because you've seen this graphic a couple times today. But the bottom line is that we have to prepare for the next generation of vessels because they demand deeper water. Just alone in 2024, we handled 830 vessels between 8,000 and 17,000 TEUs. I think someone mentioned it earlier, but just in case, that's a 20-foot equivalent unit. And of that, 128 were between 14,000 and 16,000 TEUs, which is kind of like our workhorse, as it was mentioned earlier. So those vessels, though, are limited to high tides. They have safety restrictions with the 50-foot depth. So that's where advocacy and advancing legislation to support this project comes in. And that's a really important piece of it because we want to increase the safety and efficiency of these vessels transiting our harbor and keep our port competitive. At the same time, reducing pollution because the larger vessels are bringing in more concentrated amounts of cargo for us. So that's a win-win. And if you take a look at the 50-foot project, and Joe kind of highlighted some of this, but the Corps and the Port Authority restored more than 40 acres of marshland during that time. And we also retrofitted ferries, tugboats, and by doing that, we were able to eliminate 3,000 tons of surplus nitrogen oxide. What's more, that beaches were replenished, fishing reefs were created during that time, and then dredge material also helped remediate landfills and brownfields. So what have we done so far in terms of advocacy? Joe also mentioned that we got the project authorized. Well, that was a big check on the list because that happened in 2022 when the President signed Water Resources Development Act. So the project got authorized at $6.3 billion. But that federal authorization also allows us to do engineering agreements, detailed planning work. He mentioned being in the PED stage. And then we can award contracts and procure funding. Cost containment is also crucial for us because we're using public dollars. So in WRDA, that's an abbreviation, Water Resources Development Act of 2024, cost share allocations were adjusted. And we hope at the Port Authority that that's going to keep spending at optimal levels for the project. Just one last point. The need for dedicated funding to maintain these waterways is vital too. Deficient port gateways impact the nation's ability to export important goods and also keep imports at competitive costs. So the original 1986 Water Resources Development Act enacted Harbor Maintenance Trust. And that was intended to fund 100% of operations and maintenance for the deep water channels. But over time, that got eroded. So most recently, we've been really working hard to rectify this. But once again, it's at risk. So the full HMT fund should be distributed appropriately to ensure that channel maintenance also takes place. So it's not just enough to deepen, you have to maintain. And also to allow for ports to have specific needs met. So just to close it out, developing a comprehensive strategic approach for public projects, we're better able to optimize public funds and serve the overall environmental benefits and public interests for projects like the harbor deepening.
Thank you. I hope we've given everyone who's here today leaves with maybe a little more knowledge, but also perspective on the depth, sorry for the pun, and breadth of the harbor deepening effort in New York and New Jersey Harbor to Joe's term, I think what's really unique about this project is the synergy that it creates, and that how much work from different disciplines it takes. So much work from the Port Authority and the Army Corps that have already happened, but so many efforts ahead to continue to move this work forward and find things like beneficial reuse of the material as well. So since we are close to the end of time, I'll open it up for we have a few minutes for questions, and we can be here for any follow-up that people have. Rick. Rick asked about the future of funding and where we stand, so I think that's a Joe and Hilary question.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting discussion as we go forward. Our intent is to request the funding in '27, as I mentioned, so that we can move forward. We had the last round of deepening to 50, incredible bipartisan support for the project. Incredible amounts of funding were put forward year after year. Rick, you were certainly involved in that, where we were seeing as much as $200 million a year, which enabled us to build a $2 billion project in just a little over a decade. We want to set this project up with a significant amount of financial efficiency. So we're looking at large contracts. We're looking at creating a scenario where we'll be able to align a beneficial use of dredge material project up with a contract so that we can really get after this. And the Port Authority has been successful in some negotiations on the cost share. We've got some new legislative language that I think is going to be significant from their end. And so we will be seeking to build this project efficiently. So we will ask for consideration of a very large amount of money so we can get after it.
Yeah. And just to, it is a significant project because it's about 10 times the cost of any other national project of this, a port's significance. So cost containment is definitely going to be something we're going to be working toward.
And I'll just mention, to add on to that, and Hilary's correct, the $6 billion price tag on the project, I know, took a lot of folks by surprise. But at the same time, I know what the 50-foot project cost, and I know during the study, because we condensed the schedule significantly, we made a lot of assumptions that we believe probably will have the projected cost much higher than what this will actually cost. That said, we know that costs have escalated since the 50-foot, and we'll be where we're going to be, but we expect at least that the efficiencies we'll put forth to create that financial reduction potentially are going to bring the cost of the project down. That's our hope.
Hello. Really enjoyed hearing about the ecological reuse and was just curious if there's a process in place for when the dredging is happening. If there's any ecosystems below the water, how do you prevent those from getting destroyed or kind of capturing anything that's caught and maybe releasing it? Just curious about that end of it.
Yeah. Joe, you can probably answer that, but.
Yeah, I'll take a shot at that. As we develop the projects, we will actually be working during times of the year when we're reducing the risks to aquatic species and aquatic habitat. That's always been part of the project. The project was reviewed and complies with the Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, but we also add additional restrictions to minimize the impact. So you hear things like closed dredge buckets or a 2 mile per hour hoist speed on a mechanical dredge, or we'll actually set forth the use of a certain type of dredge that we know is going to have lesser impacts. I'll tell you a little story. When we first did the 50-foot project, we wanted to reduce some of the impacts of our in-water blasting on certain types of species. So we actually did a lot of studies to look at acoustic ways to scare fish off, and we found actually the acoustics made it even worse. More fish gathered around the dredge when we were using that equipment. So, we kept the work during the time of year when spawning or fish were not coming into the harbor. We know there's some impact, and we look to mitigate that the best we can by creating additional habitats. As was said, we create a lot of fishing reef habitat, a lot of wetlands, and we also did studies that demonstrate that when you do dredge, there is an immediate impact to the aquatic environment in the dredge area, but that ambient conditions return relatively quickly.
Time for one more? We have time for one more question.
All right, thank you. Yeah, 100% dredge beneficial use is pretty impressive, and I think we know the upland disposal cost associated with that is extremely high. Are there any innovations that you've looked at or sought for transporting that material upland to some of those ecological sites?
Definitely go in and look at the dredge material management plan. You'll see that it identifies broad categories of a lot of different types of potential beneficial uses. One of the important things we're getting the word out on here is we're looking for partners. We're looking for government agencies, we're looking for NGOs, we're looking for folks who are willing to partner with us who can get a benefit from the use of our dredge material. Our dredge is out there digging it up, putting it in a barge, and we have the capability to take that material somewhere and work with a partner. We're looking at economic type projects where maybe there's brownfield reuse. For those of you who know the harbor well, we had the LPGA tournament this past weekend at Liberty National Golf Course in Jersey City. There's over 1 million cubic yards of dredge material from the 50-foot deepening that went to that site. If you know the Bayonne Golf Club, over 4 million cubic yards of mud from the harbor deepening was used on that site. If you know the islands in Jamaica Bay, Blackwall Island and others, we put millions of yards in Jamaica Bay to create those islands, not only for habitat, but for resiliency. We've looked at a lot of other options. Some are, emotionally charged to some, but science has to rule the day. So we've looked, and you'll read in the dredge material management plan, the notion of maybe it is time to fill in the borrow pit that was used to build the airport at JFK. Maybe it is time to fill in the borrow pit that was used to get the fill material to build Giant Stadium or the New Jersey Turnpike. These are big holes out there, and let the science drive the decision making, and we can come up with some really innovative environmental solutions. But fishing reefs right now, they're all offshore. Should we be building fishing reefs in the lower bay? Should we be talking about large scale environmental sanctuaries? If you go to the Chesapeake Bay, you'll see a place called Poplar Island. If you go to Norfolk, you'll see Hart Miller Island. These are unique, innovative projects where the folks are really happy that we're dredging the channels because they're getting the materials to build these incredible environmental projects. So we want to be out of the box here. We really want to think about what are the opportunities. And when you think about it, the Port of New York and New Jersey, or the harbor estuary, has lost over 85% of its wetlands in 400 years. We've lost species that were here in the past. There are a lot of opportunities if we want to think out of the box, and we want to build that advocacy amongst all of us, the port operators, the consulting firms, the environmental organizations, civic organizations, and try to find consensus to get behind a project. Some of these are going to take some regulatory changes. We know that, but that's an advocacy that we need to take on as well, is how do how do we come together and promote some of these and work through all the hurdles, or get over all the hurdles to get them into place?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll just reiterate what Joe said, but also highlight, I think, from anyone who might be working for an organization or with an organization that would use dredge or is just a constituent, it's really important to think about these barriers and what we can all do to overcome them. I think the regulatory one, we've talked a lot in the past about, is key, but one of the things is really operational, logistical. These are huge volumes of dredge material, and any of you who are in the construction world or construction industry know that coordinating like material reuse, even if you're talking about pavers, is hard to do. And so syncing these scales and syncing the timelines of these projects is going to take an incredible amount of coordination. And so that's a really important thing for us to be advocating with for our public agencies, to invest the time and staff and thought into having this level of coordination to really realize the beneficial reuse projects that we want to see. So, yeah. Thank you guys all for sticking around. I think we'll all be here for the rest of the day, but I know there's another round of panels to get to.